Hello and welcome to the Ahaki podcast, season 2. In this season, we will be focusing on litigating sexual reproductive health and rights in Africa. We'll also pick some minds from other countries. We will be taking a deep dive into the South to South knowledge exchange, where we are learning from other countries in as far as what does it mean to litigate sexual reproductive health and rights. I'm Solomon Serwanja, and welcome to this podcast series. Firstly, we will be joined by Anand Grover. He specifically asked me to pronounce that name that way. Anand is a lawyer and director at the Lawyers Collective. He is also a senior advocate practicing at the Supreme Court of India. His is a lifestyle of law. He has lived it, he has gone to court, he has practiced, and we thought that we could pick his mind on what it really means to litigate sexual reproductive health and rights in India. Anand, thank you so much for joining us on the Ahaki podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Let's go. Firstly, litigating sexual reproductive health and rights in India. What has been your experience like?
Well, I think we have to go back in history to understand what are sexual and reproductive rights. And one of the most controversial things have all over the world been abortion, which actually was brought about by the colonizers. And they brought with them the Catholic view of abortion, which was that when the fetus is actually given birth to, conceived at the time of conception, the fetus become a person in law, in religious connotation, and therefore it cannot be done away with. You can't abort from the day of conception. Now, it therefore became criminal. And the highlight or the unique characteristic of colonizers was that whatever behavior they thought was immoral or had to be purged in colonies had to be criminalized.
Say that again, because I think it's important.
Yes, but anything that they disliked morally or religiously, they just criminalized it, which is wrong. For example, criminalizing sex work. Sex work was not criminal in most of the colonies. In India, it was not. It was revered as a profession. Drug use was not criminal. A person taking cannabis in India, in fact, they do it twice a year in holy days, Mahashivratri. They take cannabis, and in fact that particular concoction bhang is not illegal, just to protect the religious celebration of it. And abortion. But mind you, it was not a European export, as it were, because the Greeks and Romans allowed abortion. It is only when Roman Catholicism took over that they criminalized it, because they viewed a conceived child right from day one as a person. And then in common law, which is judge-made law in England, which exported the law in the colonies, the British Commonwealth, as it is now, they actually exported first the common law with the rider of the Catholic system. So if you were to actually abort a child, the fetus as it were, then you would be criminalized. So that was the major reason of criminalization of behaviors in the colonies, which now has to change.
Yeah, I mean, you just really hit it right there. Common law, the English came up with their legal and policy frameworks and exported it to their colonies.
Yes,
wholesale. And it's still alive in our legal system, despite years of post-independence.
That is what is, colonization is known or understood as direct rule by the colonizers. Colonialization is remnants of their culture and the legal system, which continues till today. So we have to actually change that, not because we dislike, because it was colonizer, but it's bad for society. Why do you criminalize a person who aborts a child? Why do you criminalize a person who's engaged in sex work? Why do you colonize a person who, for example, takes hash or cannabis when you're allowing alcohol, which is so dangerous?
Yeah, it's interesting because we still carry those laws in our countries.
Laws and cultures.
The penal code.
Yes.
And we've been meant to believe that everything is wrong. Not because we decided that it is wrong, but because someone imported their legal framework into our legislation, and to date our penal codes continue.
Yes.
I mean, our penal codes go back to as far as
19th century.
Imagine, and we still live with those.
Well, let me be fair on that. Like, the Indian Penal Code was the first example of it. Then that was replicated all over the Commonwealth. Because Macaulay built it up. They took 30 years to develop it. Not all of it is bad. In the sense, for example, before that law, they treated the colonizers and the colonized differently in terms of punishments. So the Indian Penal Code, when it was enacted in 1861, it said, no, all of you are equal as far as crime is concerned. So there are good things in it. It's very logical. But the colonizers' powers remained intact. Certain things. If you go against the colonizers, sedition. That's one part. Then their culture, in terms of religious and customs and cultures, they exported that, which actually, rather than actually trying to change a person's culture voluntarily, they made it criminal, like in sex work, abortion, drug use, etc.
Yeah. Do you then think that we need to start the decolonization process?
Yes.
And it has started. I mean, in, for example, Africa, we're starting to look at what are the Afrocentric views in the academia in terms of the papers that are being published. How do we start to decolonize our academics in terms of the literature so that it anchors our thought process rather than leveraging what already has been done with the Eurocentric ideology? How important is it for us?
I think before I come to that, we have to be very careful that we don't actually throw out the baby with the bathwater, because the system which was developed had certain logic in it in terms of law, pure and simple. Equality, for example, the constitutional human rights framework is also Western, but it is based on rights of ordinary people throughout the world. But the colonizer imposed not only subordination of the colonized people, but also pernicious cultural norms, like, for example, abortion. So you have to be very careful. Like today in India, they're talking of going back to the Hindu society. We can't go back because that is unequal society. So therefore we have to be very careful. We go pick the good things by using our brains, using our intelligence, which is good for society, like, for example, equality, liberty.
But that has to be anchored
Yes.
in people. Like, people have to be part of the legal process.
Yes, absolutely. You see, the colonial law was decided in sitting in somebody's office in Delhi or England or what have you. Now when you develop new laws, ordinary people must be involved and participating in the lawmaking.
Correct.
I'll give you an example. The Lawyers Collective actually was tasked by the government to draft the HIV bill. We did it through consultative process throughout the country. Children, HIV people, sex workers, drug users, government offices, everybody was consulted. That's how a law must be made. So everybody's point of view is taken seriously. I may have a different point of view from you on a particular subject, but we can't ignore yours or mine. We have to take both. And they say, okay, what is good for this person? What is good from this person? And everybody's point of view is considered actually seriously, because we understand that that also involves dignity of an individual. Not only that, you never get a fully holistic view of anything unless you consult people. I always use as an example. Now, I am looking at you from the front, but I can't see your back. If I want to understand you as a full person physically, I must ask him, what does he look? So, in order to come to a holistic, comprehensive point of view, we must discuss, we must participate. Participation is the key to better legal systems or better thinking.
Yeah, but I mean, we've been made to adopt laws that are colonial in nature, and we have deliberately refused to go back and revisit some of those
You
laws.
have to look at them, but only be careful. Don't bring the bad of the old days again. Because there are something bad in the old days, something good. So we have to be careful.
But you see, that's why I disagree with you, because what is bad to you? Like you mentioned, I'll give you an example. If the people of the Hindu people, even when it's, I mean, with all its disadvantages, if the people, the law is the people, it should be reflective of the people. So even when you consider it, when the West considers it bad, but the Indian people decide on what is law.
See, this is a very important question you have raised. Now, our constitution was developed at the time of partition. The country was divided into Hindus and Muslims on the basis of a partition. But when India formed, there were 18% Muslims. Now, if the constitution said everybody has to be treated alike, all religions have to be respected, we can't go back and say the Hindu majority will decide. So that's the point I'm trying to make. So now,
but the people decide on that.
People will decide through a mechanism.
Exactly.
Agreed. No, but we must have an enlightened point of view. See, for today, India has survived 77 years because we have a pluralistic constitution. All the people feel vested in the constitution because they have a view in it, they have a place in it. Suppose we say Muslims are not allowed to pray in the mosque, something like that. Some Hindus want that. Then those people will feel disenfranchised. Mm-hmm. So in every country, there are minorities. Okay? So we have to take them with us.
Right.
And that is the plurality of the constitution. We don't allow oppressive systems by anybody, whether a minority or a majority. But to take different communities, religious, ethnic, together is the essence of a constitutional order and peaceful order which has built on fraternity. That's the human rights framework also. So we have to be a bit careful when we do it. Today, the ruling party in India is talking of Hinduism as the way to behave, but Hinduism as a caste system, which actually oppresses certain occupational groups. We can't go back to that.
Yeah.
And other communities may have other things which are patriarchal or whatever. And we must examine it from everybody's point of view.
I agree.
That's the only point.
I agree. Senior Counsel Anand, let's go to court now. You've practiced for over 40 years in the Indian court system. How has it been like litigating cases of sexual reproductive health and rights?
Well, I think in India we had a unique example of starting public interest litigation very early on. So there's a rich experience of that. And there are lots of civil society community groups who actually are very active on that. So we have a very rich history. The experience has been positive because where the legislature fails and the constitution order says you have to do this, the court steps in and actually rectifies it. So even in the area of sexual and reproductive health rights, it has been positive. So we had the old English law in the Indian Penal Code. Mm-hmm. Then we replaced it with a more scientific one under the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, which was then given much more elaboration by Supreme Court judgments, which now is based on a constitutional scheme of respecting the dignity of a woman, her autonomous decision making, her reproductive choices, and her being at the center of it. And of course, also realizing that when the fetus is viable, you cannot exterminate it. So in the medical termination of pregnancy, 16 weeks to 20 weeks, no problem. The woman can take a decision. By the decision of a single medical practitioner who has to opine. 20 to 24 weeks, 2 doctors have to opine. And after 24 weeks, a medical board has to be set in to see that the fetus is not viable or the woman's health is not endangered thereby. But it's more on medical scientific basis that it is being done and keeping the woman's decision making autonomous, her privacy and her rights being respected.
Okay. India is one of the countries that registers the highest cases of rape and sexual violence in India.
Yes.
What then happens in cases where women have been raped and abused?
No, so even if the woman is raped, it's her decision what to do. Obviously, 99% of the cases, she'll say, I want to abort. So then the question for her, first she must know that she can do it. Everybody doesn't know their rights. So we need to actually, there are women's active civil society groups who actually then come onto the scene. Their advisor, the government will advise. Government doesn't give necessarily proper advice. Like in a very famous case of Suchitra, where the government said she's mentally retarded, she's pregnant because of rape, she should actually now abort. She didn't want to abort.
Wow.
Yeah. So then the Supreme Court said, sorry, you can't take a decision on her behalf. It's her decision. But the government, because she has mental retardation, the government will support her if she wants to have the baby and bring her up. Contrary-wise, if the woman wants to abort, she can do it if she wants. It's her decision making. So I think the law now is fairly settled in India that these choices have to be made by the woman, and the woman's choice must be respected until it becomes too late where the fetus is viable. Then the question...
So the question is on the viability of the fetus.
Earlier, as I said, the Catholic view was moment the child is conceived in the womb, it becomes a person in religious terms and in legal terms. You can't abort. Then they had a space in common law which says, no, is the fetus viable or not? According to them, when the woman becomes quick with the child starts moving, it's said to be quick. Woman is said to be quick with the child, then she can't abort. It's actually the viability of the fetus. The viability of fetus is now determined by medical diagnosis. So you can delay it up to 24, 25, 26 weeks. But the moment it becomes viable, then the courts will hesitate to terminate the pregnancy. So you have up to 26 weeks anyway, without a problem.
Would you then consider that the legal and policy framework in India reflects the people of India and can be described as progressive in a way?
I would say it's more scientific and rigorous. Progressive may have any other connotation which I don't want to use, but there's no dispute around in political terms also whether a person is from the right or left wing. They're now doing it on the basis of the medical diagnosis, either the single medical practitioner or two medical practitioners or a medical board. So it's based more or less on that and the respect and the decision making of the woman. So I think it's a good system now, much better than it was long time ago when the British ruled.
Okay. Has this then in a way improved service delivery, for example, for women who want to procure a clinical abortion?
Yeah. Actually, it's fairly easy for a woman if she has the legal knowledge or knowledge of that. Now, problem is, in all these things, implementation at the rural level, where there'll be family pressures, there'll be community pressures, etc., etc. If there's a rape, obviously it'll be easier for the woman or even her parents to do it. So we need to actually make sure that the young girl or the woman has the knowledge that she can do it. Because a woman who's had pregnancy not by rape, but by other means, like she's having a relationship with a man and she becomes pregnant. Now that time, the parents want to abort. Okay?
Yeah.
The woman may not want to abort. It depends. So she has to be able to get all the information and then take a decision on herself, and that has to be respected. Minors are obviously treated differently because they don't have the capacity to decide in law. The parents or the guardians will decide. So we have to be able to give information to the woman, and that's not been easy. Whereas in the case of HIV, there's a huge amount of information going out into the public. So people came to know about HIV. But in terms of women's reproductive health and rights, it's not easy. Because women don't know. Now, there are new things coming up which are much better. So there are systems online available where you can get information free of charge about so many things about reproductive rights, and they are free. So women are coming to know, young girls are coming to know of what happens sexually, what happens to a baby, all sorts of things, whether it's diseases, whether it's health intervention, which are actually becoming popular. So their information is going down. But I think the government has to be proactive on these things and encourage it. But it's difficult for them to talk about sex, which we could talk about in the HIV arena very easily. Now it's gone back to the old days. Don't talk about sex.
Oh.
Everywhere is the same story. Earlier in the HIV arena, we used to talk about sex quite openly. What is good for you, what is bad for you. Sex is pleasurable, but it can harm you. Because if somebody has STD and you don't know about it, and you don't use a condom, you can have STD. Okay, it can be treated. But then if you get HIV, it's not easy to treat. If you get hepatitis, it's treatable, but it creates a lot of complications. So young people have to be taught in schools, and not all schools do it, that sex is pleasurable, of course. And you should know about it. And you should also know the good things, the pleasure, and the hazardous things. If you don't know, then it's not easy. So very important to talk about these issues.
Yeah, but generally there is that pushback, from cultural leaders, religious leaders on such subjects.
Yes,
I'm sure you have experienced
these are
that in
taboos.
India.
Oh yes, everywhere. These are taboos. But in HIV it was easier because the result was devastating to become HIV positive. Until 95 in Europe and US, when medicines were available, it was a death sentence. And in India, till 2004, it was a death sentence. So you had to talk about it. And it was easier. But now again, gone back.
How do you navigate those pushbacks from religious and cultural leaders?
We talk to religious. We also talk to religious leaders. But our audience is the young people who become the potential victims of anything. And they want to discuss, they want to know. I'll give you an example. I used to be a teacher in a primary secondary school before I became a lawyer. So it was very interesting. One day, I got a group of young girls between 10 and 12. And they said, "Sir, we want to talk to you." I said, "What about?" They said, "Sex." I said, "Hold it. I can't talk to you just like that. I'll have to talk to your main teacher. I'll have to talk to the principal, and I have to talk to your parents before I can talk to you, and I won't be the alone person in the room." It was agreed, because young people, and I'm talking about 1979, 45, 50, 46 years ago. So I'm not that young. So...
And access to information for young people is very important.
Very, very.
There are discussions in this country, in Uganda, about access to information to young people, age-appropriate information. We have, there's so many policies. For example, the school's health policy in Uganda, which has matured to about 18 years, and actually it's now 19 or 20 years, and we've never signed it off. And so even teachers like you are worried about speaking about sexuality or sexual education to young people. And because of that, young people are not exposed to getting this information, because there's just that cultural setting and religious settings that, young people cannot be told some things.
But young people, because of the internet now, get that information from wrong places. So unfortunately now you cannot not give information, because you're competing with YouTube, internet, which gives wrong information about sex and wrong things. So unless you compete with them, you're actually leading the children and young people into the wrong path.
Correct.
So a lot of people get information about sex on porn sites, and some of them may be okay, but the 90% of them are bad, because they're talking of pedophilia, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So it is very important for governments to actually make sure that there are proper good information about sex, good things about it and bad things about it.
Great. And then let's just go back to the temples of justice in India. Certainly culture and religion is part of the social construct. Have you managed to bring on board the judges from lower courts to the Supreme Court to be a bit open on the subject of sexual reproductive health and rights and litigation?
I'll tell you, on HIV, which actually involves sexual and reproductive issues, the first time we talked about it, it was very difficult. In fact, I was told by the court, if a person is HIV positive, the whole world should know about it so they don't associate. This is in the early 90s. But over a period of time, we actually were able to educate judges. Like here, there are judges, and talk to them about these issues, and then they became much more open to persuasion. So there is a need for education of judges also. And there are judicial academies which do that job. And I'm fortunately invited to those academies to talk about it, but I do it in a provocative manner. So make them think.
Has it had any impact
Oh,
on
yes.
the way they look at this subject? Certainly, subjects of sexual reproductive health and rights are a bit, there's a thin line and can easily be misunderstood and can shape the way judges look at cases and the independence of the justice system.
Yeah. Actually, the leadership of the judiciary is a very important facet of whether judges will take on board these issues. The present Chief Justice on these issues is very good. He talks about them openly, and so therefore there is a lot of room for educating judges also. And the last 3 decisions by him actually have been quite good. So it depends on the leadership of the judiciary. It depends on what environment they are brought up in, and then how they take on board things which are not only constitutional but rational and scientific. Because everybody is influenced by what happens in their childhood. It's true for everybody. Don't associate with that person because he is so and so. That's prejudice. Now, the mother may have thought of because of ethnicism or racism or what have you, but that has no basis in law in our constitutional setup. So we have to de-educate and re-educate people, and that requires skill, and that's what happens in the educational system, including the judicial education system. So I am very provocative, and I always tell judges, I ask a question which they actually think is very bad, and then they realize the advantage of asking, because it starts making them think. Like I said today, I asked judges of the National Judicial Academy, High Court and Supreme Court judges, and I was asked to be provocative, and I asked them, how many of you take drugs? So, but I told them then, but I have alcohol every day. So they thought drugs are only narcotics. Alcohol is also a drug. Now that opened up a vista for discussing issues. So you have to have the skill to open up people's minds so that they can discuss without the prejudice.
Yeah.
That is a skill, I think.
Yeah, and it's important because then it helps for the judges to
Yes.
make,
And I think
their judgments
Yeah.
with an independent mind, right?
Yes. It's not easy to be independent. So many things, your prejudice, culture, religion, your parents, this, that, the other, it actually influences your mindset. So you have to be, eradicated of any cultural prejudice, any racial prejudice, sexist prejudice, whatever you have. And it's always good to talk to other people and find out what they think. Not only in your small group, but I have a habit of talking even I'm on the plane. I start talking to the person sitting next to me and find out. I feel that you need to know more about other people and see what they think. So you realize whether your points are right or wrong. So I'm very happy that I'm talking to you.
No, interesting. I am learning as much as I can on what India is doing. Before we can conclude, let's talk about taking this conversation to the academic space. The School of Laws and, in Uganda, I think the Makerere University School of Law now has, a course unit that really speaks about litigating sexual reproductive health and rights. That, of course, is being taught by Professor Ben. And the university as a whole is now bringing this into academic and curriculum. How is it in India?
Well, let me tell you, I was born in Kenya, so I have a huge regard for Makerere. I mean, it's like an institution which we revered when we were children. So I'm very happy to note at this meeting that Makerere is very active. It is also depending on the institution. There are so many educational higher level institutions. The law colleges are actually doing that. And also public interest litigation is a way for a lawyer to move upward very quickly, because you get noticed. You get noticed by judges, you get noticed by the press. So there's a bad side to it. But if you're very good at that work, you have to be serious, you put quality work into it, then it will help the system. But everything has its pluses and minuses. So our view is that we should encourage litigation which is serious, which actually emancipates people on the basis of their rights, and particularly constitutional and fundamental rights.
Any lessons for Africa?
Well, it's only the experiences, because now each country has good quality legal minds. I mean, I was asked to do amicus briefs in Kenyan High Court, and they have superb judges, women judges. So we learn from each other. And the main thing that I think we can learn from India is that they've replaced the colonial system of the Indian Penal Code with their own law, the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, which is now being interpreted by the courts in a constitutional, fundamental human rights paradigm. I think that's happening also in Kenya. I was fortunate to give 2 amicus briefs on HIV, and the judges were excellent. So I think we learn from each other in like 2 sisters or 2 brothers learn from each other.
And those judgments can be put into the jurisprudence here as sources.
Yes. So I mean, I have cited that Kenyan judgment in the Indian Supreme Court also. So now we are learning from each other. So that is great. And when I meet judges from different countries, they said, we are learning from you. So it's really an interchange of ideas, exchange of ideas. That's how it should be. We are now treating each other equally. Earlier, English judge was supposed to be, sorry, now everybody has learned. Everybody has gotten educated. But now the real thing is the economic power, not the mental power. It's not the intellectual challenge, it's how we change the economic power that governs the world.
Interesting. As we get into the economic power, where do we go from here?
We have to start thinking. I'll tell you, the biggest challenge, and let me say this, is not to the liking of a lot of people, is that human rights are for a certain section of the people, according to the West. So Israel can devastate Gaza with impunity in violation of rights, and nothing can be done about it. That's the sad part. So we who are basing our work on human rights activism have to set that right. Nobody can behave with impunity. We have to set that right. Colonialism and coloniality thrives because violation of human rights are being ignored in parts of the world. Whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Gaza, wherever. We can't allow. Like Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere, injustice is injustice everywhere.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with Anand. He told me to pronounce it that way, Grover, who is a practicing lawyer at the Supreme Court of India, as well as the director at the Lawyers Collective in India. I'm Solomon Serwanja, and this is the Ahaki podcast.